11:30 a.m. Bolivian time. I repeat, 11:30 a.m. Bolivian time. But anyways, if you cannot join me, it's okay. Okay, but if you do, fantastic. We're going to practice together. All right. Well, awesome. Let's start tonight's class. Well, we have a fantastic class ahead, so let us start. Let me share my screen and let's go. Well, here we are. So let's start with this fourth type of question, as we stopped in the third one last time, and we're going to continue from here on. Well, we are in the detail question. So detail questions are roughly, okay, this is the fourth type of question, by the way, and it's called detail question. And these detail questions are roughly equivalent to the factual questions from the TOEFL reading section. They deal with the specific facts from the listening section, but they are not usually as specific as detail questions in the reading section. Because you don't have the option of listening to the recording a second time, you will depend on the information that you wrote in your notes, okay? Now, for this reason, detail questions in the listening section rarely deal with very specific information, like numbers or names. Instead, they focus on those facts that you would recognize as important as you listened to the recording. Detail questions are usually in harmony with the main idea of the recording. Before you mark a final answer, revisit the main idea of the recording and make sure that your answer choice makes sense considering the main idea. Okay, let me explain this a little bit. So you know that I told you this in this type of question, or well, in this section actually, we only have the opportunity to listen to our material once. Each lecture or each conversation merely reproduces itself once. That is to say, we cannot listen to it twice or three times or more than that. Therefore, in this type of question that, by the way, the only thing it asks is, what does the passage say about this? That is to say, what does the lecture say about this specific topic? Or what does the conversation say about this specific topic? They are going to be asking you about very general details, not very specific details. In order for you to identify this question, let me tell you that this question is basically as the ones we receive in our exams back here in South America and Central America. For example, we normally have exams, right? Like, I don't know, our professor says, you're going to study from page 25 until page 30 or until page 35 or 40. And on the day of the exam, we receive, of course, a test, an examination that gives us questions about what we study, right? It says, in page 23, we discussed the French Revolution. Therefore, when did the French Revolution start, right? Or in page 26, we discussed one of the greatest captains in the French Revolution. Who was it, right? And we have to respond. And this type of question is very similar because, as I say, it merely asks, what does the passage say about this? That is to say, what does the conversation say about this? What does the lecture say about this? It's merely a detailed question, a factual question, okay? It's asking you about the information that was stated just as you received it. And you have to respond this as you respond the questions in our exams here in South America and Central America, merely by remembering the information you listened, in this case, or in this case, consulting your notes, okay? Well, what I was trying to tell you is that in this case, dear students, given that you are not listening to these lectures twice or more times than that, they know that, of course, it's going to be very difficult to remember things like, for example, number, I don't know, things like names, dates, colors, or something like that, that is mentioned in conversations and lectures. And to this point, with you, dear students, we have listened to different passages, lectures, and conversations already. And if you notice, these lectures contain a lot of information, and professors normally include a lot of details like names, dates, cities, colors, and things of that sort, right? And sometimes very difficult terminology as well. And of course, ETS knows that it's very much, I mean, it will be too demanding and challenging to ask you to remember things like that. Specific dates, specific names, colors, cities, things of that sort. So please, when taking notes and when listening to your passages, when listening to your lecture, when listening to your conversation, never focus on those details that are super specific details, okay? Like dates, numbers, cities, colors, things of that sort, or very specific words, because they are not going to be subjects for your questions. Your questions are not going to be asking you about that information, okay? What they are going to be asking you about specifically in this detailed question type is those details or information that you would recognize as important as you listened to the recording, to the lecture, to the conversation. It's going to be something that it is evidently something important. And of course, that basically is the same as saying those main ideas or those main commentaries or that main information mentioned in the lecture or the conversation. So they're going to be asking you about that, all right? So as I say, please don't waste your time by writing down on your notes things like names, numbers, etc. Unless, and here I have an exception, unless, dear students, you listen that the professor or the speaker constantly repeats that information. For example, if the professor repeats a name several times, like every single time he repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats the name, or a date, for example, he repeats the date, repeats a date, repeats and repeats, or constantly and constantly repeats, I don't know, a city or a color or something like that, a number, then, of course, just for precaution, take notes on that, because maybe in that case, it's going to be a detailed question if they are constantly reminding you of that. Nonetheless, normally, when you have details like these ones, like numbers, dates, numbers, or names, they are briefly and concisely stated in only a specific situation of the passage. And that is when this information is not considered in your questions, when the professor or when the speaker merely mentions this once in a very remote and vague manner. Those are details that are not going to appear. But those ones that are, as I say, are repeated and repeated and repeated are suspicious. So please take notes on those ones, because maybe they are going to be detailed questions, okay? Fantastic. So take this into consideration, all right? Very good. So, and this is, by the way, a very good time for you to check out the quality of your notes. Why? Because in this type of question, dear students, as I am stating, you are going to be required to remember a specific information that was mentioned and included in the passages, in the lectures, or in the conversations. So, of course, we are human beings. Our memory is not absolutely powerful. We have flaws and errors. Therefore, we are sometimes going to forget information. And this is the time for you to go and consult and ask help to your notes. That is the reason why, as I told you, you've been writing notes in the first place, in order to remember if at some point you forgot information that was useful to you in order to respond questions. Now it's the time for you to go and check them out if you need to remember something that is beneficial or useful to remember this important data and respond the question. Now, if you go to your answers, to your notes, and you are not able to understand them because you have no organization, if you are not able to know where your notes start, where they end, if you are not able to read them entirely because they are too large, they are too extensive, then please, red flags, you know that you have to improve a little bit. But if you're able to access your notes quickly with a lot of organization and easiness, okay, you have all reasons and all the right to breathe for a while and know that your notes are fine. Okay, so please make that assignment somehow. Do this exercise, try to look at your notes, and if you're able to understand and to access them easily, that means it's a very good indicator that you're actually taking good notes, okay? And this is especially important for this type of question, the detailed question that, as I say, will ask you and require you to come back to the beginning and remember information, very specific information, in order to respond to these questions correctly, okay? Fantastic. So now that we have detailed that, let us please talk about something else. Now, these questions, dear students, are going to come in two different formats, okay? And I want to discuss this before we move on to our example or illustration. These questions may be presented to you in two different formats, as I say. The first one consists in one-choice questions, which means you would just have to choose one possible response. What do I mean by that? Look at this question, for example. This is a detailed question. It says, according to the professor, what does liquid water signify about a planet? As you can see, dear students, in this question, it is, of course, asking about a passage that we have not listened. Therefore, of course, we're not going to respond. But if you notice, the only thing that I want you to understand is that this is a question that merely has one correct response, right? Because it's telling you What does liquid water signify about a planet? And here you have a set of responses, yes, but merely one of those responses is correct. And in this case, as I told you, all the questions in the in the listening section are multiple choice. Therefore, when you respond, normally you have to, well, as I say, choose just one response. But sometimes for this type of question and for any other type of question, there may be a second format. Not that you have to write down your response or something. As I say, all of them are multiple choice. You always have to click on the response and that's it. But there is a second format. Let us analyze it. The second format will give you the chance to choose multiple answers from a series of possible options. Typically, there is an announcement that says choose two responses. Look at this example. According to the professor, what problems would gas planets have in sustaining life? And as you can see, besides this question, there is a very short sentence with very small letters as well that says choose two answers, right? And as you can see, this is the indication for you to know that in this question, there is not just merely one correct response, but there are actually different responses. How many? Two correct responses. And in this case, you have to go and click on two different answers, okay? Because as I say, this question has two different correct responses, and you have to click on both of them if you want to receive the full score for this question. That is why it's super important for you to go and please, dear students, always make sure to read the entire question and to check out if there is everything or if there is something, I'm sorry, besides the question or below the question. If you identify there is something besides the question or below the question, that is going to be a sentence that, as I say, indicates to you if there are more than one responses to pick. When you read that, you know how many you have to pick, and please make sure to pick them all, because if you don't do so, as I mentioned, you're not going to receive the full score for this question. If it was worth 2 points, you're merely going to receive 1 or something like that, okay? And by the way, you are not only going to have to choose 2 answers. It could be 3, 4 answers. Everything is going to be detailed and specified in, as I say, this announcement or sentence that you have below the question or besides the question. So please make sure to read these small letters and to make sure how many of these responses you have to pick and choose with your mouse, okay? Fantastic. So those are the 2 formats you're going to have for this type of question and for all the types of questions, actually. So please make sure to always check out what you have besides the question and below the question. If there is anything, if there is nothing besides the question, below the question, that means that it is a question with merely 1 correct response. Then you don't have to worry about 2 or 3 responses, but merely 1. If you don't have any sentence below or besides the question. But when there is something, it normally indicates you to choose 2, 3, 4 answers. So you have to pay attention to that, okay? Fantastic. Well, now let's get into our practice, of course, into our illustration. For that regard, we're going to listen once again to the conversation we listened yesterday of this student detailing his problem and his issue with his tuition. We're going to listen. Please take notes once again in order to access them later, and we are going to respond to this question, okay? So please let us listen to this lecture. Oh, conversation, I'm sorry.
Listen to a conversation between a student and an administrator at the university's finance office.
Hi there. Can I help you?
I really hope you can. I'm worried I'm just really worried I'm going to be in trouble.
Oh? Well, don't panic. Just relax. I'm sure we can deal with whatever's going on. What's the issue?
Well, I've received 2 separate statements about my tuition payments in the last week, and they seem to... It looks like they kind of contradict each other.
Uh-huh.
I've been a student here for 2 years, and I've never gotten any notice like this before. The language seems a little threatening, and I'm afraid that if I don't figure this out, I'll be kicked out of classes or something.
I can assure you that nobody's going to kick you out of class. We'll sort it out. Now, did you bring the letters with you?
Yep, I have them right here. The first one is similar to the reminder I get every month to make a payment, but
Here, let me see.
it has some extra language out of the norm. There, at the bottom. It says something about penalty payments.
All right. And did you miss any payments that you know of?
No, I've never missed one.
That's strange. And what about the second notice you received?
That one says it's the final warning to make a payment, or else my enrollment will be canceled. That doesn't make any sense because it's the first warning I ever got.
Okay, are you sure these are the only two notices you got in the mail from us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, then, it certainly seems like there's been an error, because if the statement were accurate, you would have received additional notices from us. Let me just look up your account in our database and see what the problem is.
Thank you so much. I'm just a little stressed out that something will go wrong with my classes.
Oh, sure. Just a moment while here we go. I think I found the problem. Did you make your last payment during a school holiday?
Sure, I mean, I think I did. I guess I made the payment during spring break. Is that a problem?
Well, you didn't do anything wrong, but it looks like there was an error in our system. The computer is supposed to automatically process payments when the offices are closed, but for some reason, your payment never went all the way through. It's still pending approval.
So why did I get only a final warning notice?
Well, I'm not completely sure, to be honest. We were coming back from a holiday, so there may have been some confusion.
Well then, I mean, what do I have to do to fix this?
Nothing at all. I'm approving the payment now and noting on your account that the error was ours. Just make your next payment on time and you won't have any more problems.
Wonderful. Thanks for taking care of this. That's a huge relief.
Very good. Well, we have finalized listening this conversation, and now it's time for us to respond the question we were facing. And this is the question. It says, what problem does the student have? And as you can see there, students, in other words, is asking, what does the conversation say about the student's problem, right? But here, of course, they are paraphrasing the question in other manner. What problem does the student have, right? It's basically saying, as I say, as asking, what does the conversation say about the student's problem, okay? And here we have some answers. He received another student situation statement. He received a notice that his payment was late, he forgot to pay tuition during a holiday week, or he has been barred from attending classes. So which one is the correct response in this set of possible responses? Let us go to see final recommendations before we respond. The only thing you must do here is to remind the passage or consult your notes to find the answer, as I told you. To respond this question type, you must ask yourself, what does the passage specifically say about this? No more than that. Once you found the portion, remind that the correct answer will express the same information, but maybe the words will be different, but the content must be equal. What do I mean by this? Imagine that you are in high school and you have an exam about the French Revolution. So on the page 26 of your book, it says that Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the greatest military officers of the French Revolution. Now, when you go to your exam on that topic, a question says, who was Napoleon Bonaparte? And you see a response, a possible response that says, he was a very important captain in the French Revolution. Would you pick that response? I ask you, would you pick that response? And yes, you would, right? Certainly. Why? Because captain and military officer are basically synonyms. There is no reason to think that that is not the correct answer just because it doesn't say military officer, okay? So as I say, in this case, we are looking for an answer that expresses the same idea or the same topic, the same information, but it doesn't necessarily contain the exact words you had in the conversation, in this case, or the lecture. You're not looking for the exact words, and certainly you're never going to find the exact words because it will be too easy to identify the correct response if they were stating the same words than in the conversation. But nonetheless, look for an answer that conveys, as I say, the same information delivered to you in the lecture or conversation. Maybe not with the exact same words, but it's fine. It will never have, it will never have the exact same words, but it will have is, as I say, the same information, the same idea. And if you find out a response that contains the same information and idea, go for that one, okay? Fantastic. Okay, very good. Here we are. So in this case, what problem does the student have? And here we have the answers. And well, in this case, the correct one is answer B. He received a notice that his payment was late. And maybe you are wondering and thinking right now, but the statement, the phrase, his payment was late, is never mentioned in the lecture, right? Or in the conversation. And yes, I admit that is true. We never listen to the speaker himself or to the secretary saying that his payment was late. But nonetheless, as I say, isn't this a synonym of I pay my tuition, but here it says that I didn't pay? Or have you paid your tuition? Have you have you covered your tuition? Have you done that? I mean, is it fine? Are you let's say on time with your payments? It's exactly the same, right? These are synonyms, and it doesn't mean that just because you don't have here the exact same words the speaker used in the conversation that were in this case. Here I received a notice that says that I didn't pay my tuition when I paid, right? But here you don't have that statement, or here you don't have that sentence, and that is totally fine. Let me tell you, it is not necessary for you to find out, dear students, the exact same words. This is the correct answer because it expresses the same information than in the conversation. But in this case, the student received a notification from the college saying that he didn't pay his tuition when he actually paid, as he said, right? So his problem is this one, although as I say, not with the same or with the exact same words that are mentioned in the conversation. So please don't worry about that. Whenever you find this type of a scenario with the words not being exactly imitated, it's fine. If it conveys, if it expresses the same information, it's totally fine. It's the correct answer, okay? What about option B in this case? He received another student's tuition statement. This is actually false, right? Because in the conversation, he never says, for example, hey, I received this notice that says for Peter, but my name is John, right? If he said something like that, if he had expressed a concern similar to the one I have just expressed, maybe it could have been he received another student's tuition statement, but he never said something like that. What about option C? He forgot to pay tuition during a holiday week. This is also trying to confuse you. It's a wrong answer. Why? Because it says he forgot to pay tuition during a holiday, but it's actually the other way around, right? Because the conversation said that it was because he paid during a holiday week that he had the problem in the first place, because apparently nobody works in that college during holidays. Therefore, computers process the information on payments, and his payment wasn't processed, as simple as that. Therefore, he had this trouble, but he paid during a holiday. He didn't forget. Okay, so this is wrong. It's trying to confuse you. And let me give you here a word of advice. These incorrect responses always try to confuse you by giving you information that was mentioned in the conversation or lecture, yes, but they make this information to be incorrectly stated. They corrupt it, they disrupt the information, they make wrong connections with the information presented. Okay, so please don't let yourself to be convinced too quickly. D, he has been barred from attending classes. The same scenario here is trying to confuse you, because although we saw yesterday that his main preoccupation and his main worry was actually to be barred from attending classes or to be kicked out of classes, he never said that he was already barred from attending classes. He never said that he was already kicked out from his classes. What he says is that he was afraid, right? He is afraid of being kicked out of classes, not that he has already been barred from classes. So as I say, this is always confusing you in the manner of, in this case, time indications, or in this case, time regulations. So please be careful, be precautious, try to always suspect about everything, okay? Because by doing so, you're going to come up with the correct response. And remember, simply ask yourself, what does the conversation, what does the lecture say about this? And you're going to find the correct response, okay? As simple as that. Any question, dear students, any concern about this type of question? Please tell me. Alexander, Diana, Juan, Angel, Jasmine, questions about this type of question? Any question?
No, teacher.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Diana. Fantastic. There you are. Great. Well, I guess that the rest of you guys do not also have questions, so let's move on. Here we have the attitude question. Well, let's discuss this one. Attitude questions, like function questions, often deal with information that's given, not just by what the speaker says, but also by how they say it. They will ask you about what information the speaker's intonation and word choice give you about the speaker's feeling and relationship towards the subject. Let me explain this very quickly. Imagine, for example, dear students, that I am your biology professor, and I tell you something like this. I give you a fantastic class on Darwin's evolutionary theory as your biology professor. I give you a fantastic class. A lot of information, a lot of data, very good comparisons, a lot of things, right? I give you a fantastic class. But imagine that at some point during my class, I say something like this. I say, well, now that we have finalized this preposterous and ridiculous theory, let us move on to discuss a more interesting one. If I say that at some point during my class, even although I have given you the best class ever possible about Darwin's evolutionary theory, what would you think is my personal opinion on Darwin's evolutionary theory? If I say, well, now that we have discussed this preposterous theory, let us move on to a more interesting one. If I say that with that intonation, with that word choice, what am I expressing to you? What am I conveying? Of course, I am conveying that personally, I dislike Darwin's evolutionary theory. Maybe I don't find that to be very much convincing. Maybe I find it to be, well, I don't know, incomplete, unsustained, whatever. But the point is that it doesn't mean that because I give you a fantastic class, about something, I actually believe it to be good, or I actually like the subject or something like that. So why do I tell you this? Because in this type of questions, dear students, what you have to do is basically to look for the personal opinion of the professor after delivering his lecture. Because professors give lectures, they give classes, yes, but nonetheless, their classes do not always reflect their personal opinion about the subject. As I say, maybe I am a fantastic biology professor, I give you the best classes about Darwin's evolutionary theory, but maybe I dislike that theory, right? And I maybe open up to you and I let you know that by having a particular word choice discussing that topic or my intonation, right? Because those things tell us very much about what somebody thinks on a specific subject or topic. So what I say, dear students, is that please, in this type of question, we're going to go for the personal opinion of the professor, not for the data or factual information he mentions, because all the rest of questions are for that. But now for the attitude question, we're going to try to discover the personal opinion of the professor on the subject he's discussing, okay? Fantastic. So let us listen once again to the lecture about Botticelli, Sandro Botticelli, and by following this one, we're going to practice this question, okay? So please, all of you, take your pencil, take your notes, and try to, of course, have a very good register of this lecture, okay? So please, all of you, listen to this one, and we're going to practice later.
How many of you have heard of Alessandro di Mariano di Vanni Filippelli? No? Nobody? Well, let me put it this way. How many of you are familiar with the work of an artist called Sandro Botticelli? Or just Botticelli? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's definitely an easier name to remember. But a lot of you might also be surprised to learn that his work fell out of favor from shortly after the Renaissance until the late 19th century. That's right. It's really only within the past 150 years that Botticelli's work has returned to popularity. And yet, within that time, his name, well, his alias, has become synonymous with the kind of grace and beauty that characterizes the best of Renaissance painting. Patronized by the famous Medici family, Botticelli's work was celebrated during his lifetime for some of these same qualities. While his earliest works often used religious subject matter, well, we've seen this throughout the course, haven't we? How common this was. These are not the works that are most celebrated today. In fact, let me ask you, what are the paintings that you most associate with Botticelli? Well, The Birth of Venus is definitely one of Botticelli's better-known works. His masterpiece, Primavera, which was painted 3 years earlier, was done in the same vein. Primavera means spring in Italian, and here's a slide of the painting just here. These are words that didn't rely entirely on the iconography of the Catholic Church. While we do see some holdovers from Botticelli's earliest work, the main subjects of these paintings go back to earlier traditions of gods and goddesses. Note the extensive use of nature as a metaphor, in addition to the nudity of some of these figures, or the skimpy clothes used to cover them. Actually, however, Botticelli was extremely religious and would end up painting work for churches and cathedrals using Catholic iconography for the rest of his life. The Madonna and Child, for example, were a popular subject. Because of that, it's kind of strange that he fell out of favor. At least his paintings were in churches, chapels, and villas all over Italy. But in 1502, almost a decade before he died, in 1510, he was already disappearing from the public eye. Even though he had painted frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, Botticelli's work was commonly overlooked in favor of that by his neighboring artist, Michelangelo. It took almost 3 centuries before an English collector, William Young Otley, bought a Botticelli in Italy and brought it back to England in 1799. Even then, the painting wasn't exhibited in public for almost another 60 years, when its next owner, William Fuller Maitland, lent it to an Art Treasures exhibition in 1856. There, it was seen by more than 1 million viewers, and art historians began to take note. Some of these historians had already taken an interest in Botticelli's Sistine Chapel's frescoes, and his reputation again began to blossom. By the end of the century, Botticelli's work had been extensively admired. The pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood found inspiration in them. The first monograph, or book of paintings, by the artist was published in 1893. Botticelli had the last laugh, though. In the first 20 years of the 20th century, more books were written about his art than about the art of any other painter dead or alive. It just goes to show you, the art world is ruled by trends. Just because a particular artist isn't popular at a given moment, doesn't mean that there is no value in his or her work, or that it won't be popular once more, even if it does take 3 centuries.
Great, awesome. Well, now that we have listened to this lecture on Botticelli, it's time for us to respond to this question. What is the professor's attitude towards Botticelli? And here we have some options. He says he enjoys some of his work, but not all of it. He believes people would hardly recognize him. Oh yeah, Chrisbel, question, please tell me.
No, teacher, we couldn't see the slide, but now we can.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, so it says, what is the professor's attitude towards Botticelli? And here it says he enjoys some of his work, but not all of it. He believes people would hardly recognize him by his true name. He believes his career teaches us about religious structures, or he considers his work has no actual relevance in art history. Well, so before we respond to this question, let me share with you some recommendations in order for you to apply when deciding what answer to pick. Your objective in this question, dear students, is to deduce what type of personal position or opinion does the speaker have with relation to one specific topic. This position or opinion will come up to you very clearly by paying attention to 2 different aspects. The first one, the wording he is using, okay? Remember, the wording he's using, and or the intonation he uses, okay? The intonation he uses. And as I told you, these are always the 2 reliable and very, very much trustworthy criteria we can use in order to determine somebody's opinion on the subject he's discussing. Intonation and word choice, okay? So, for example, and I have to recognize here, intonation in this case for these lectures and conversations do not normally, let's say, render a lot of help and support when deciding what response to choose. Because normally for this material and these audios, dear students, professors are not actually changing their intonation. And if you notice, for example, in this recording that I have shown you, that I recorded, I actually didn't change my intonation as well. Why didn't I do it? Because in the original one that I was trying to imitate in this particular lecture, the professor didn't also change or made any variation in his intonation. So as I say, anyways, pay attention to the speaker's intonation, just in case at some point, for example, the professor says something like, well, now let's move on to this other topic. If you listen to that intonation, of course, it's telling you that he dislikes or that he considers this topic to be boring or something. But normally professors do not use any alteration or variation in the intonation they are using. Anyways, pay attention to it. But as I say, it is not normally the best criterion. Now, what is the most solid and reliable one is the wording, and this one never fails. What is the wording the professor is using when discussing his subject? By wording, I mean the word choice. That is to say, what words is the professor applying in his speech? And you're gonna trust me in this one, the professors always reveal their personal position and opinion by the words they use to transmit the idea or the subject they are using, okay? Now, don't forget that these questions may appear with emphasis to different contexts. Therefore, your aim will always be to discover the underlying personal position of the speaker, even if it is not directly stated in the passage. Nonetheless, you must always have a textual basis to support your deduction. Let me show you, for example, what is the correct response in this third question. The correct response here is, once again, B. He believes people would hardly recognize him by his true name. How can you know this? By paying attention to the very beginning of the conversation, of the lecture in this case. When the professor said, right, have you ever heard about Mariano Filippetti, right? And he said, really? Nobody knows him? What about if I tell you Sandro Botticelli or just Botticelli? Oh, that's what I thought, right? Because everybody on the class knew him, knew Botticelli. Now, that little sentence, oh, that's what I thought. What does that sentence tell you? Oh, that's what I thought. It tells you that the professor had a self-assumption, a pre-assumption. He had an hypothesis that he was trying to test with his students, that he thought nobody would recognize Botticelli by his actual name. But when giving his alias, as he did, in this case saying, but what about Sandro Botticelli or just Botticelli? Oh, that's what I thought, right? Like, I knew that you were to know that name, Botticelli, his alias, his AKA, his artistic name, however you want to name that. Everybody would know him, right? And how do you know that? Because they say, oh, that's what I thought, right? With that word, oh, that's what I thought. It's implying that he had a previous conception on mind that nobody would recognize Botticelli by his actual name, that is Filippetti, right? Mariano Filippetti. But people will know him by Sandro Botticelli, that is his artistic name that apparently he chose for him. So, as I say, what can you know because of this sentence in this exercise of the professor in the lecture, that he believes people would hardly recognize him by his true name? That is to say, Botticelli, right? That is his opinion about Botticelli, that people do not normally know him by his true name, but by his alias. And this is actually true, and it happens normally in our lives, right? That we know artists, I don't know, we know Shakira, let's say, but we don't know what Shakira's actual name is, right? Who knows it? I guess somebody here may know it if you're a fan, but people do not normally know it, right? I mean, what's the name of that person? So as I say, this is what the professor is doing, and you know it because of the word choice, because of the words he's using. So be very much sensitive and careful when listening to the professor's words, because those words, trust me, reveal a lot, okay? As you would see, and as you managed to see in this case, right? When the professor said, oh, that's what I thought. Oh, well, it's a very easier name to remember, right? He continues. Well, what about A? He enjoys some of his work, but not all of it. This is not true. And you know this because at no point the professor says, for example, when discussing one of his paintings, now let us discuss the World of Venus. That is, well, not the best painting he had, right? maybe with that wording, you would guess, oh, if he's saying that this is not the best painting he had, so apparently he enjoys some of his work, but not all of it. But the professor never said something like that, right? It wasn't one of his best paintings or something. He never mentioned any phrase like that. Therefore, you cannot say that this is his personal position or opinion. The same for C. He believes his career teaches us about religious structures. The only time when professor mentions religion is when he discusses that he was, that is to say, Borselli was extremely religious, but he never says anything about he teaching us something about religion or structure or religious structures. We don't listen to anything of that sort. What about D, for example? He considers his work has no actual relevance in art history. This is totally fallacious. Why? Because at the end of the lecture, the professor says with these words, and I quote, Botticelli had the last laugh. More books were written about him than any other artist in the last 3 centuries. He says that, right? So what is he implying? What is he saying with that? What is he revealing about his opinion on Botticelli with those words? That he considered he was certainly a very relevant artist to the world history, right? So there is no way to say that the professor believed he had no actual relevance if he is by himself saying that he believed Botticelli had the last laugh, because although he discussed Botticelli was not recognized at the beginning, at the end, 3 centuries later, people started to give value to his art, right? So this cannot be the correct answer because the professor himself says Botticelli had the last laugh. He was the only person who managed to be victorious at the end. Well, any question, dear students, about the attitude question? Anything that I could clarify here? Tell me. Alexander, Crisbel, Diana, Juan, Angel, Jasmine, questions?
No questions for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Jasmine. Yeah, thank you very much. What about the rest of you guys? No questions? Great, thank you very much, Diana. Fantastic, thank you very much. Well, let us continue then. We are in the last type of question, the categorizing question, okay? Let's read, it says, categorizing questions ask you to sort key items from the lecture according to certain criteria. Fantastic. Some of the answers will usually be stated, whereas others will be implied. And the categories may differ from the most obvious ones mentioned in the lecture. Let's take a look at an example. Well, we're going to listen this time, dear students, to a brand new lecture. Okay, we have never listened to this one, so please pay attention. It's a new lecture. In this case, it's about history. And after we listen to this, we're going to respond and analyze the question. So please take notes on this one because we have never listened, and make sure to prepare organized and very concise notes. Okay, let's start and let us listen to this lecture on history.
Listen to part of a lecture in a world history class.
In any introductory course, I think it's always a good idea to step back and ask ourselves, what are we studying in this class? And why are we studying it? So, for example, when you looked at the title of this course in the catalog, Introduction to World History, what did you think you were getting into? What made you sign up for it? Besides filling the social science requirement. Anyone?
Well, just the history of everything, like starting at the beginning with, I guess, the Greeks and Romans, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, that kind of stuff. Like what we did in high school.
Okay. Now what you're describing is one approach to world history. In fact, there are several approaches. Basic models or conceptual frameworks of what we study when we do history. And what you studied in high school, what I call the Western Heritage Model, this used to be the most common approach in U.S. high schools and colleges. In fact, it's the model I learned with when I was growing up back, about 100 years ago. At Middletown High School up in Maine. I guess it made sense to my teachers back then, since, well, the history of Western Europe was the cultural heritage of everyone in my class. And this remained the dominant approach in most U.S. schools till, maybe 30, 40 years ago. But it doesn't take more than a quick look around campus, even just this classroom today, to see that the student body in the U.S. is much more diverse than my little class in Middletown High. And this Western heritage model was eventually replaced by, or sometimes combined with, one or more of the newer approaches. And I want to take a minute to describe these to you today, so you can see where this course fits in. Okay, so up until the mid-20th century, the basic purpose of most world history courses was to learn about a set of values, institutions, ideas, which were considered the heritage of the people of Europe. Things like democracy, legal systems, types of social organization, artistic achievements. Now, as I said, this model gives us a rather limited view of history. So in the 1960s and 70s, it was combined with or replaced by what I call the different cultures model. The 60s were a period in which people were demanding more relevance in the curriculum, and there was criticism of the European focus that you were likely to find in all the academic disciplines. For the most part, the different cultures model didn't challenge the basic assumptions of the Western heritage model. What it did was insist on representing other civilizations and cultural categories in addition to those of Western Europe. In other words, the heritage of all people, not just what goes back to the Greeks and Romans, but also the origins of African, Asian, Native American civilizations. Though more inclusive, it's still basically a heritage model, which brings us to a third approach, what I call the patterns of change model. Like the different cultures model, this model presents a wide cultural perspective. But with this model, we're no longer limited by notions of fixed cultural or geographical boundaries. So then, studying world history is not so much a question of how a particular nation or ethnic group developed, but rather it's a look at common themes, conflicts, trends that cut across modern-day borders of nations or ethnic groups. In my opinion, this is the best way of studying history, to better understand current-day trends and conflicts. For example, let's take the study of the Islamic world. Well, when I first learned about Islamic civilization, it was from the perspective of Europeans. Now, with the patterns of change model, we're looking at the past through a wider lens. So we would be more interested, say, in how interactions with Islamic civilization, the religion, art, literature, affected cultures in Africa, India, Spain, and so on. Or let's take another example. Instead of looking at each cultural group as having a separate, linear development from some ancient origin, in this course, we'll be looking for the common themes that go beyond cultural or regional distinctions. So, instead of studying a particular succession of British kings or a dynasty of Chinese emperors, in this course, we'll be looking at the broader concepts of monarchy, imperialism, and political transformation.
Great. There you are. Thank you very much for having listened. Well, we have finalized then with the lecture on history, and now it's time for us to analyze this type of question. This type of question, dear students, is basically like this. You're going to receive 3, 2, or more boxes, as the ones that you can see here in the middle of my screen. You have 3 boxes in this case, right? And each of the boxes you receive is going to have a category within it. In this case, for example, the first one says the Western heritage model. The second, the different cultures model, the patterns of change model, right? In this case, these are the categories, but of course, depending on the topic you have, these categories vary. Now, it says, match each of the topics below with the type of world history course in which it will most likely be discussed. What is basically telling you is, below the boxes, as you can see, you have some statements, some sentences, and you have to find the category to which each of these statements corresponds. That is to say, each of these statements corresponds to one of these categories, is related to one of these categories, has a relationship, a connection with one of these categories. The only thing that you have to do is to drag your response within the box you consider matches that category in this sentence as well, okay? That is what you have to do, as simple as that. Now, for example, in this case, the first sentence or the statement says, the contributions of Native American art to United States culture. This is the first statement. And we have to link this statement and to drag it within the box that we consider has a relationship, a connection with this statement. And in this case, that connection, the instructions here tell you, is where would you think this sentence or this topic could be taught? In which of these classes, right? Because these categories in this case for us are classes. Classes with all the methods to approach history that we saw or that we listened in the lecture of the professor, right? The Western Heritage Model, the Cultures Model, and the Patterns of Change Model. So if you listen carefully to the lecture, dear students, then you know that this sentence, the contributions of Native American art to United States culture, is certainly connected to the second category, the different cultures model, because the professor in her lecture said that the different cultures model approach to history tells us that we have to give a glance to all cultures and the contributions and all the offerings they have done to our current human civilization, not merely the Greek or Roman ones, as of course the Western civilization represents. But we have to look at different cultures, Native Americans, Mayas, Incas, who knows, right? But the point is that we have to look at all those cultures. And this one, the contributions of Native Americans to the US, is certainly part of that, is a focus on the Native Americans and how they helped and shaped the American culture. So this will be part of the second approach, and you have to drag this within that box because, as I said, it has a relationship, it has a connection with that category. What will be the independent discovery of printing techniques in Asia and Europe? This is certainly one that you should connect with the patterns of change model, right? Because if you listen to the lecture, the professor said the patterns of change model simply studies different events, happenings, and phenomena, and how different and diverse cultures around the globe reacted simultaneously to those events, happenings, and phenomena. In this case, independent discovery of printing techniques in Asia and Europe is certainly an example of that, because how Asians and how Europeans reacted to the invention of printing is a very good manner to see how these different cultures reacted to the same thing, right? To printing. So this is part of the third approach the professor taught, and you have to drag this one to that category, the patterns of change model. Finally, we have just one, and by definition, well, it's ancient Roman foundations of the United States legal system. This one would go to the Western Heritage Model. And as a law student, I can tell you, when the professor says Western, it basically means Romans and Greeks. So when it says here, ancient Roman foundations of the US legal system, well, this basically corresponds to the first category, the Western Heritage Model. So you have to drag this one and connect it with the first category. And it's the same for all the other questions like this one. They give you boxes, maybe 2, 3, or even 4 boxes, and each of those boxes has a category. Below you have statements, and you have to link and, of course, connect those statements with the category that corresponds to each of them. Is there any question, dear students, about what to do in this type of question? Anything that I could clarify? Tell me. Alexander, Jasmine, Cruzbel, Diana.
Yeah, I have a
Yes.
question.
Tell me,
Maybe I got confused when I learned this, but I thought that Native American is the people that was born in the United States.
Yes.
But if we see that approach, the different culture model, it wouldn't be the same Native American living in the United States.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, well, the thing here is that for Americans, they don't consider that Native Americans are actually part of them, right? Because Americans, like the original Americans, were settlers from Great Britain, right, to the country in the 16th century. So in this case, it will be part of it. because as you can see, the question itself makes a differentiation between Native Americans and the US culture, right? So separating them, like these are Native Americans and this is our culture as Americans. So they can influence us because they are not part of us. So yeah, I mean, you are right, you have a point there that, yeah, they are, of course, of the same country, but nonetheless, as I say, Americans normally consider them to be very foreign people, right? They don't consider that they are natives as these people are, but they consider that people is another culture. And here we have the US culture that has been developed, as I say, by following British models, right, and European models. But anyways, I think that this is the correct response in this case. But yeah, you have a point there. But trust me that in this case, and for other questions, it's more simple. It's merely about remembering the information and connecting, okay, to the categories. But you're right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. Fantastic. Thank you for your question. What about the rest of you guys? Questions, concerns, commentaries? Tell me. Something? No questions? Okay, great. So I have a gift for you, by the way, before we finalize our class. Oh, I want to share. I don't want to stop sharing. Here. I have a gift for you, as I was saying. And well, I wanted to send this to you. This is a material that I gathered for all of you to practice. These are a lot of websites and links where you can practice the listening section by yourself. Okay, this is free material resources. I'm gonna send it as well here to this other group. And of course, yesterday, some of you expressed me that you were having some trouble in understanding the lectures and conversations. Totally normal. Don't worry. We are not used to, of course, listening to academic material in English. It's not what we are taught about. But apart from the link that I sent you last time, I took the responsibility to look for other material that I think is going to be very useful and very important for you to use as practice. So let me send it to you right now. I went to YouTube and I found 3 incredible resources that are free, that are, as you can see, I'm sending that right now to the groups, here and here. Okay, here and as well here. These are lectures from the best universities of the world that are available on YouTube. So I'm sending them to the WhatsApp group, and these are series. So basically, when you get into, you're going to discover that there are not just 3 videos, are a lot of videos. So I hope you find this to be very much useful for your practice. You can just get into, listen to these lectures as a podcast, maybe when you are driving or I don't know, when you are cooking, and try to get used to this professor discussing this topic, how they talk, the way they speak, the terminology they use, because there are a lot of subjects here. And by listening and listening and listening this, trust me, you get used to it, to listen to how they speak, the expressions they use. And as these are actual classes, like real classes, it's exactly the same experience you also get in the TOEFL exam. So please get into this series of videos that I sent you, and I hope you find them to be very much useful. Okay, fantastic. Great, so that's the gift for you. And now I'm gonna take your assistance, okay? Well, so please help me, dear students, with the, oh yes, Jasmine had a question?
Yeah, tomorrow is gonna be like a practice class for this listening section.
Exactly, yes, it's going to be a practice. The entire class of tomorrow is going to be practical. And okay, as I say, I know that many of you are not going to be able to join us. Don't worry, all the practice, I'm gonna send it to the WhatsApp group as well later on, and to the YouTube channel as well. Okay, but yeah, the sentence, yeah, the class is going to be about practical exercises.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, let us say your assistants. Please help me, dear students, with the traditional poll, okay, that we always fill. And going to be sending, okay, great. Sheets of paper. Great, here we are. Okay, listen to your names. Is here present Juan Pablo Duran?
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Juan. All right. Let me just continue. Okay. Please help me, dear students, with one more poll. You know, it happens that, you know, last Wednesday, we didn't take the second poll, okay? But please look at your screen and help me with one more poll, because each Wednesday we have to fill 2, but as we didn't have classes, okay? So please help me with that one. Sorry for bothering you? Great. Is here present Crisbel Dania? Poma?
Yes, teacher, I'm here.
Thank you very much, dear Crisbel. What about our dear Lucia Adresola? Okay, what about Duran Dayana?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much, Diana. All right. Here, I got you. All right, what about Jasmine Azucena?
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Jasmine. What about Paula Andrea? Okay, what about Andrea Mercedes? What about Alexander David?
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Alexander. What about Intriago Angel?
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Angel. What about Antesana Mateo? Antesana Santiago? Sara Neda y Kevin Alcides. Well, nothing here. Well, thank you very much, dear students, for your presence. See you tomorrow if you have the opportunity to join me, 11:30 a.m. Bolivian time. If you are not able, don't worry, okay? Full tolerance for your presence. You're going to have present, and the material will be sent to the WhatsApp group and to the YouTube channel, okay? See you tomorrow if you can, and have a wonderful weekend.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, teacher. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you later. Thank you.